Let's turn our attention now to Syria, where the main Islamist rebel leader says senior officers of the Assad regime who were involved in torturing political prisoners will be named. According to Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, rewards will be offered for information about senior army and security officers involved in the crime. We have details on this report.
In Syria, the desperate search to uncover crimes secretly committed by the ousted leader Bashar al-Assad is ongoing. At the Saidnaya military prison, rescue workers say they have ended their search for possible detainees in secret cells without finding anyone. Specialized teams, assisted by dog units and individuals familiar with the layout, have been combing the prison as crowds gathered in the hope of finding their missing relatives. In Damascus, rebel fighters reportedly say they have found more than 40 bodies in a hospital morgue, showing signs of torture. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency representative for Syria says 16 million people in the country urgently need humanitarian aid. About 800,000 Syrians have been reportedly displaced due to rebellion in the country. Before the Assad saga, 7 million Syrians were displaced internally, and more than 5 million had fled to neighboring countries and beyond. The UN Human Rights Commission for Refugees says activities are gradually resuming in Homs, Hama, and the Syrian capital Damascus, which are the most affected cities by the rebellion. In Syria, the desperate search to
Well, for more on the Syria's leadership vacuum and the move by rebels to uncover human rights abuse by the Assad regime for possible prosecution, I'm being joined from the United Kingdom by a geopolitical analyst, Bola Adediran. It's good to have you join us on The World Now.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a lot of people are hopeful for Syria's next chapter, but when we look at the rebels and the various factions that have stormed Damascus, they have a complicated past, and some will say that they are offering an unpredictable future. Talk to us about what you think the potential scenarios would look like post-Assad Syria.
We've seen this story before. We've seen this movie before. We've seen it in places where the dictator was ousted and what became of that country was chaos. We've seen it with Iraq. We've seen it with Libya. And for me, as you've rightly mentioned, it's very concerning. Of course, let us not make any mistake about it. Assad was a murderous dictator too in his own right. Don't forget, in 2014, he literally launched an assault that involved chemical weapons against his own people in Homs on August 21st, 2014. And his 24 years of brutal dictatorship has rightfully come to an end. But what is more concerning, as you have rightly mentioned, is the factions, the rebel factions that have taken control of Syria now. They have their history in Al-Qaeda, they have their history in Islamic State, and we've seen, we also know that they are very extreme in their ideology. It is of no use the kind of assurances that they are giving us, which is that they are going to rule moderately, they are going to be as inclusive as possible. What we want to see are action. We want to see a return of the rule of law. We want to see democratic principles being established. We want to see that they will not use this opportunity to impose their own extreme ideological preferences on Syrian society, who have experienced dark times for the last 11, 13 years during the civil war. So yes, it's concerning, but I'm not hopeful. But we can all just hold our breath and see how things turn out.
Of course, we're holding our breath to see how things pan out with Israel bombarding, having some strikes there in Damascus. But first, before we go to what Israel is doing, right, how do you think, what would be the different outcomes, particularly when you look at the impact on the region and the world and the implication, of course, for global security?
It's very true that what has happened in Syria will have enormous geopolitical implications. First, we know that Iran is clearly in a troubled state. We know that because if Iran was not very weakened, that it would have come to the aid of Assad. Granted, the spate of HTS maneuver through Aleppo, through Homs to capture Damascus was quite lightning fast. But nonetheless, the absence of any attempt to even resist the rebel forces shows that not only Hezbollah, which came to the aid of Assad in 2013, not only Hezbollah is weakened, but Iran is also weakened. And it also shows that Russia is weakened, because don't forget that Assad has gone to Russia now and has been granted asylum in Russia. And Russia was one of the key backers of Assad and helped him stay in power from 2011 when the Arab Spring started. So there are so many implications of this. And for me, what I want to see, and I'm looking at, is what would happen to a country like Turkey. Will its influence expand dramatically? What would happen to Israel's security attempt to Israel's attempt to expand its security cordon, not only in Syria but in Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, I think I can hear you clearly now, but lost you for a bit. Just in the last minute, you were talking about, but just before you take us back to what you were talking about, right? I just want you to add this on, taking a look at what Israel is doing now and how that particular region has been thrown into some kind of chaos, and looking at the balance of power that we want to see in the region now. What do you think the potential consequences will be for Israel, knowing that its relationship with its neighbors are not really pleasant?
No, I think this is great for Israel. To be honest, it's everything has worked out amazingly for Israel. In fact, a bit too good, if you could add. Don't forget that Iran has been weakened, Hezbollah has been weakened, Hamas has been weakened, Syria, which has been a sort of a conduit for Iranian weapons to go through Iran to Hezbollah. That regime has been toppled, and you can absolutely be sure that HTS is not aligned with Iran, because of course they've been fighting Iran and Assad and Hezbollah for the last 10, 12 years. So the point basically is that this is great for Israel. I mean, obviously, everyone is concerned about what Israel is doing now, which is that it's basically violated its international agreement with Syria in 1974, and it's crossed the buffer zone in the Golan Heights. But at the same time, you also expect that Israel will try to ensure that certain groups and actors do not take advantage of the situation to entrench themselves in parts of Syria, and then in years down the line begin to cause security problems for Israel. And you can see that even the US also has been launching attacks against certain positions in Syria. So everyone is concerned about the potential consequences of the vacuum, particularly ISIS, and which still has some fighters in Syria. But I think this is fantastic for Syria, for Israel. This is the best gift that Israel can ever imagine.
But you wouldn't say the same for Vladimir Putin. Some have said that the collapse of Assad's regime represents a very real military loss to Putin. What role have powers like the US and Russia played in supporting, or should I say, opposing the Assad regime?
Well, this is terrible for Vladimir Putin. It's terrible because it undermines his bargaining position with Trump. I mean, Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine is going on well. He's been able to capture 1/5 of Ukraine's territory. But at the same time, it also shows that the sanctions placed on Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine has really caused a lot of loss of manpower, loss of equipment, and probably even it distracted him. Don't forget, for Russia, Syria is important. the naval base Tartus is its only military base in that region. And through that naval base, it's been able to project power in Africa, in Middle East, and even in parts of Asia. Through that base, it has access to the Mediterranean. So if it loses that base, and I suppose that it might lose that base given that the HTS are not aligned with Russia at all, it means that Russia's global influence is undermined significantly by that. For the US, I think it's also great because it puts them in a key position. A key rival has been pushed out of the Middle East, and so they are able to also extend their influence as much as possible. The other country that has benefited from this is Turkey. Turkey, through some of the rebel groups that it supports, have managed to expand their influence in eastern Syria and in northern Syria. So, and that would ensure that the Kurdish militants that have been threatening its security on its borders are kept at bay. So Turkey has also expanded its influence significantly, and these are all very interesting times geopolitically.
Very interesting times indeed. We'll get to see who aligns with who, which rebel group would eventually control Syria at this time. Geopolitical analyst Bola Adediro, thank you so much for your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.